You are listening to the Channeling Source podcast. May what's for the highest good to occur, occur. Hey, you're listening to the Channeling Source podcast, episode 7. I'm Brandon Bloom. How are you doing? I'm a channeler and intuitive, among many other things. Of course, I'm not just one-dimensional, just a channeler. I'm not a flat two-dimensional figure that you can't see if I turn to the side because I don't exist in multiple dimensions, of course. So, hopefully all of us, I'm multidimensional. Anyways, that's a bit of a tangent. Today's episode, in the past couple, we had Kat join us, and Kat was interviewing my spirit guides, the angels and source, the Angelic Collective of Xorbítal. More info on them down in the description, of course, just if you'd like some quick background information. And okay, if you were wondering about me, you can probably find more about me on my website, which will also be in the description. Today's episode will not have Kat just because of scheduling and the ways things worked out, and with the deadline of when this episode is due, it just didn't work out for this one, which is just fine. I'm just going to trust that this is what's for the highest good to be here for this episode instead. Today's episode will feature 5 to 6, maybe more, things that I learned on my spiritual journey, if you will, and I'm interested to see how this goes as I dive into this, what presents itself intuitively and from my spirit guides, the angels and source, to be talked about. And I did sit with them ahead of time to get some of the main focal points of what to talk about. So let's delve into this. Number 1, and this one may not surprise you if you have been involved in the spiritual field, if you'll call it that, for a certain number of years. However, when I was newer, this was something that I guess you could say maybe was thrust in my face a bit. However, number 1 is not everyone that I guess you could say is in the spiritual field, or who is even like a healer per se, or who talks spirituality. Not all of them really have your best interest at heart. Not all of them come from a great, highest and best aligned place. Not all of them are actually even coming from a place where they're operating for the highest good at all. And this one was a little bit of a shocker for me when I was just starting out. I was lucky in some ways when I first got into this. Back in 2017 is when I really started going hard into this, by the way, if you'd like a bit more of a time frame. And a lot of the people around me, at least with the ways they presented themselves, they were a lot, I hesitate to use better because I don't want it to sound like a judgment, but they were a lot better to be around perhaps than some of the people I met later on as the universe was teaching me this, I guess you could say. A lot of them at least seemed to try to come from a place of unconditional love, or something akin to what would be for the highest good in this situation, or following their intuition, or if you want to call it following source's will or something like that. They might not have used those words specifically. However, there were a lot of people who either did or really seemed to make some sort of attempt to, come from unconditional love. So I really thought as I venture into this and work at spiritual shops or do whatever the heck I end up doing, I'm just going to be surrounded by people who are unconditionally loving and awesome to be around and who care about me and care about the world and other people. Wrong. Buzzer. Not the good buzzer. And none of this is to be jaded or to say that all people out there in the spiritual field are bad and going to do bad things and terrible and not come from a great place. There are definitely great, awesome, amazing people, if you will, out there who do great work, who operate for the highest good, who come from a connected to source place and really, again, look to do what's for the highest good in the world, with their actions, with their words, with how they approach things to the best of their ability. There are people who are highest and best aligned. I'll use that phrase. I like that phrase. At the same time, it was a bit of a shocker for me when I ventured into the spiritual field some more earlier on in my journey and started working at a crystal shop, for example, and there would be people in positions where you would think they would really, the phrase I'm gonna be using is like, would be of the light, or would really operate from that place, or would really know what they're talking about through and through. And the truth is they just wouldn't, as you'd spend more time around certain people or got to see more things play out, you'd kind of go, wait a second, there are definitely people here talking the talk of like, oh, being of the light and unconditional love and doing what's best for people in the world as far as what source sees it. Again, those are my words. Those might not be the ways everyone would phrase it. And then they would not walk the walk. There was pretty much zero walking the walk behind, closed doors or behind the words they were saying. Like they would just treat people terribly, or they would just trauma dump on everyone, or, or they'd really just kind of bring a darker energy, if you will, to the table. And as things progressed from there, some of the people who treated me the worst actually were people who were tarot readers, for example, or they were people who were spiritual or identified as spiritual at least, or said they were spiritual at least. So it's, I would recommend just being discerning, like, especially if you're newer to all of this. If you were lucky and met a bunch of really great, unconditionally loving people and you are like, oh, everything's going to be light and love, just be aware that that is not the case for everyone in this field. And I will say, as you get your intuition and channel guidance and divine guidance honed in more and more and more, you'll probably begin to see this even with people who you think it shouldn't be the case, whether it's people who have like a huge following, for example, and they're talking about spirituality, or people in certain positions of power, I guess you could say, even like in the field or positions with clout, you might start to recognize, like, oh, wait a second, they actually don't have great energies. And actually, it actually following their advice makes everything terrible, makes everything like way worse. It's like, how do they have that? Like, it can be really confusing when you're used to people having that social clout, if you will, being people you can trust as experts in a certain thing. Like, you'll just start to notice, like, oh, this person has a huge following, but as my intuition and channeling have honed in, like, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, they are just spouting things that are just blatantly incorrect or not true. They're just in it for whatever reason. And I guess, like, I don't think it's just a spiritual field thing. Like, there are people who are therapists or in the therapy field, and they are freaking great, just on it, great therapists. And then there are people who are in the field who are like, why are you here? Like, you don't care about people. You're very judgmental. Like, you think you're really great, but you're actually more narcissistic maybe than some of the clients you're trying to allegedly help. So, and you might think it's weird that there are something like therapists with narcissistic traits. However, that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Like, there are people in positions and fields where you think it shouldn't exist, or it wouldn't exist. And that doesn't mean it's really the case. Like, it's probably best if you use your discernment and intuition. Like, oh, is it for the highest good for me to see this healer, this therapist, this tarot reader? Oh, I'm getting no. That's interesting. Oh, now that it's been a couple years and I see what's happened with them and like, how they've treated other people, that makes sense. And sometimes it's just not the right fit. There's nothing wrong with them if you get not to take, a session with someone. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or them. Just as a heads up, I guess, don't expect everyone who is purporting themselves as spiritual to know what they're talking about, be of the light, be operating for the highest good, be highest and best aligned, be connected to source, say the accurate, correct thing 24/7. I guess you could say, don't give your power away to all these people. I mean, ever, honestly. However, I would just be aware of that existing out there and don't just assume everyone is going to be light and love regarding this. In some ways, for me, maybe it's even got to the point where I'm like, do I even consider myself like using some of the words that are out there, like calling myself like spiritual or calling myself this or that? Or is it just I'm me doing what I do, connected to source, and other people can just call themselves whatever they call themselves? I guess, like, do we even need to use these labels sometimes? I guess that's an entirely different conversation, though, about labels and judgment and projections and boxes and all that, like trying to squeeze ourselves into something like that instead of just being what we are, regardless of what people might try to identify it as. One more thing I want to talk about for this one before we go on, and I know I'm not using like a ton of explicit examples for this one. I'd really rather not just throw people under the bus, honestly. I don't think it's going to be, as far as like the people who I encountered, I don't think it's going to be people that like you guys are encountering or running into every day. So I'm not too worried about that. It's more just the general idea about that, just being aware that that exists because for some reason it shocked me when I was newer, or just the realization of it was like, oh, duh, duh. One more thing I wanted to talk about though is there are people who are even in like a professional standpoint or seem like it as like healers or something in the field. Not all of them at all. I don't think this is a majority thing, but there are people who are like they actually kind of have mental disorders or serious issues like that, and they kind of use the spirituality thing as like, oh, I don't have a disorder. I'm just spiritual and I'm just really spiritually gifted. But they're actually kind of not. They're actually just, they kind of have something that it would be better if they were seeking some sort of help for, if I'm being honest. And that's not everyone. I wouldn't even say that's most people in the field. It's just something to be aware of. Like there are people who present themselves as really great and they are actually they have something that's kind of more of a disorder. Okay, I've met a couple people at least like that, and it's kind of a bummer. And the thing is, when you're newer, sometimes you'll go, oh, but these people, they've had 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in this field, and they're so much older than me, and they're so much more experienced. Surely they know better than I do about this stuff. And, maybe there are some specific instances where they've had experiences with that. And sometimes, if we're talking about the people we were just talking about, where it's more like they have something like a disorder, like, no, just straight up, I'll just put that out there. Because a lot of the times, not always, this is going to be a topic we'll talk about in a second here, but those are the ones who are saying like really, not like out there in like a positive way thing, but just like out there to the point where it's just blatantly not true anymore, and it's like really fear based and just straight up not true. I've seen a lot of that come from people who in my personal experience tend to have something like a mental disorder behind that. Not always, that's just something I've encountered with some other people, and it might be something to be aware of. Not exactly a fun topic. However, I would rather you have that awareness before you run out and throw yourself to the wolves out there if you're newer to all this. I'd rather you have a good head on your shoulders and an awareness that not everyone out there is necessarily like looking out for you. Okay. As a quick add on, this is something that my girlfriend actually mentioned to me recently. It's not something that's really on my algorithm so much. I don't listen to a ton of spiritual content from random people online. In fact, I listen to pretty much no spiritual content from random people online if like I'm not explicitly divinely guided to listen to something or click on something. At least for me right now, including readers of any variety. And one thing that my girlfriend was saying though is she noticed a lot of people online who, again, I'm going to use like a similar phrase I used earlier. It might apply a little bit differently, but they can really talk the spiritual talk. Like they know the lingo, like the let's manifest and own your power. And I'm not going to do it as well as she did, but you might know what I'm talking about because sometimes these videos have huge views and they're just spewing spiritual sounding things. But if you really sit with it critically with what they're saying, like they didn't really say anything or it's just blatantly not true. And like it's almost like a spiritual smooth talking thing, but there's like nothing backing it. There's not connection from source. It's not intuitive. They're just saying the spiritual sounding thing that's going to be popular and potentially get a lot of clicks or a lot of likes or people buying whatever from them. So just keep an eye out for that as well. Like trust your intuition on who you're listening to and all that. And they're telling me, my spirit guides are telling me to jump to number two. Otherwise, I'll talk forever on that. So let's go to number two, which what I was saying towards the end of number one is going to segue into this pretty well here. Let me pull up my notes. Number two, the thing my spirit guides, the angels and source wanted me to get to here is that fear is a lie. So many of the fear-based things people are pumping out there, it's just not true, especially regarding spirituality, regarding working with angels, regarding working with source and energy healing and things like that. This is actually something that helped me a lot earlier on in my journey. In fact, it was someone I met really early on my spiritual journey. And I had just, because I was so interested and fascinated in this stuff early on, and my channeling and intuition hadn't like fully popped open like it has now that I've been channeling for years and years and years, where now I'd like open up, now I'd go to Google something and be like, no, don't Google it. Like the angels, my spirit guides would just be like, no. Or I'd see an article and they'd be like, no, don't click on that. Or like, don't watch that video, it's crap and it's not true. Now there's a lot more divine guidance around what I'm clicking on and consuming, if you will. However, early on, I was really interested, so I'd click and I'd read all these articles and I'd watch all these videos and I'd go around and be like, oh, this is so interesting. All this stuff is so fascinating. However, there were some, of course, like weird, just fear-based ones that were just not true at all. And there was one that was a bit more fear-based about angels and light work. And I was almost kind of really turned off from working with angels, channeling the whole spirituality thing at all, like period. Because I was pretty newer. I was like, I don't want to mess with all this weird stuff and this weird person saying this weird thing. And I hung out with someone who was more into this and had been for a longer time. And I kind of relayed that to this individual, and the individual was like, oh, well, something that came to me earlier, something that she had realized earlier was that if it's fear-based, it's a lie. Like if the fear is pretty much a lie. And looking back now, because now I can double check in with things with my intuition or my channeling, and I can be like, oh, is that weird article I read true? And they'll be like, no. So I'll be like, okay, well, now I just have that information a lot more readily at hand for myself. Back then, it did help me to avoid buying into a lot of more fear-based articles or beliefs or just weird stuff that people were jetting out there. And maybe some of it was well-intentioned, like they didn't want people to get harmed by something, but they didn't realize they were kind of just pumping out a certain frequency that wasn't the best through that, or that just wasn't true, and so like I understand that. However, it still isn't necessarily like the best and for the highest good and helpful, for other people, especially if it isn't true. And going back to number one, I remember when I read that article and saw like the author, there was like a picture at the bottom, and like the look in their eyes was maybe what you might call crazy. There was just like a really weird, and not weird in a good way, like light to it, and just a weird, just off vibe. So pay attention to that too. However your intuition is showing up, like if you read a weird article and then you see the picture of the author and you're like, like creeped out, like, grr, get away from me. Just something's off. Like trust that, and maybe trust that what you're picking up over the article and the words they tried, and maybe even the energy they tried to hand you through that article. Not that you need to be afraid. When you read that article, of course. And that would be a way of trusting yourself over what someone else says, I suppose, a form of that. The thing that's kind of occurring to me now is, wouldn't the world potentially be a better place, at least regarding like spirituality and what's taught or blasted out there into the public regarding spirituality, if any time someone heard something fear-based, if they paused and like, okay, well, I remember that quote, fear is usually a lie, or fear is always a lie, or if it's fear-based, it's not true. And they at least like questioned it for a second before they just like bought it hook, line, and sinker and started blasting it out to everyone else they knew for, whatever reason, and became a parrot that was just regurgitating that information. Like, what if they paused and be like, oh, interesting. It's interesting this person said that. It's an interesting idea. Is this true? And they at least sat with it, or at least had a conversation around it with people like, hey, I heard this. Like, I know you're really experienced with this topic. Like if they went to someone who's experienced with the topic or is really intuitive, or like, is this true? Like, and then the person who's more experienced or more intuitive can be like, no. And then there's just less needless fear or just untrue ideas out there because people are at least taking a second to critically think, or better than critically think, intuitively check in somehow, some way about a topic or a thing they heard. Because again, like we talked about with number one, not everyone who's blasting things out there into the public or talking about spirituality is really coming from the best place, working for the highest good. There's plenty of people who are sane and great and accurate and amazing. There are also people who might have mental disorders who are just blasting out really fear-based things that maybe even they think are true, or maybe some people are just more interested in trying to be right about their opinions than they are about what's accurate, correct, and can be for the highest good of people. If I put this out online, or say this to this person, etc. So it's really, I'm going to recommend it again, probably for the best that you're kind of questioning things that don't feel true to you or don't feel light to you or don't feel like, yeah, a source would put that on this planet. I'd really kind of sit with those things and question them a little bit more than just buying into the fear. The other thing about number two here is there has been a lot of religious programming, a lot of religious, maybe even brainwashing. There's a word that has been coming through from my spirit guides around some of the religious beliefs that people are really inundated with, like against spirituality. And again, some of it may be even well-intentioned. Like there are people who aren't bad people necessarily. They just happen to be raised religious, or that's just where they find themselves at this time. And they probably made a lot of choices that got them there, so I'm not trying to say they are a victim of this, but for whatever reason, they're religious and then their pastor says something, people in the community say something, and then they're really in fear about it for, how that goes if you've been raised in religion or are familiar with religions, especially Christianity, for example. There have been a lot of beliefs pounded into people to be afraid of spiritual topics like channeling or connecting to God for yourself or talking to angels or energy healing or anything like that. And just because it was a belief that was pounded into people doesn't mean it was true. One of the things you can ask is, well, why are those beliefs there in the religion? Are there certain people in the religion or leaders who are trying to keep people in the religion so the church can keep getting money from the tithing? And so if people get connected to their knowing and their own connection to source, it might lead them away from the church and them giving to, money to the church. I'm not saying that's the only reason churches do things or all religions do things at all. Might be the case for some of them. Or if you look at the history of certain religions, like for example, the Catholic Church, there was a time where Christians were trying to make Christianity prolific around the Roman time periods when there were other religions, or they might not even been religions like we traditionally think of religions now. I think that's an interesting thing that we've also been inundated with. If you grew up religion, is that everything's a religion instead of like maybe it's a philosophy or maybe it's just another way of looking at things. It doesn't have to be a rigid belief set that you have to agree with or set of rules that you need to live your life by. Anyways, if the church was trying to get Christianity to survive or get more people following it, at the time, and they were trying to kind of control people and get people controlled for whatever reason. And there were a bunch of other religious beliefs like paganism where you might do things like divination or other things. Would it make more sense for the religion that's trying to take over and control things to be in agreement with those things and other religions, or would it make more sense for it to be like, oh, you shouldn't do that because it's bad and wrong and you'll be, I don't know, I guess you'll be punished for it. Yes. And that might not be exactly how it went, but you kind of have to look at like, what was the agenda at the time period that some of these rules or things that were written down were put into place? Like you kind of have to ask the why instead of just buying it at face value. Or you have to think, how much has it been edited across the time periods to say certain things that are favorable to certain religious leaders in those time periods to, again, maintain control, keep people involved in the religion, or just to suit whatever they're trying to do with that. And, as like a disclaimer, some of the things earlier I was saying about religion might not be the total, fully their reasons as far as why the church says what it says. That was just an example I was saying to kind of get you to sit with it, think about it a bit more, and maybe to understand like not all the fear-based stuff out there is really coming from truth. So as a quick disclaimer, I wouldn't take everything you just heard from me about religion at face value right there. Again, it was just supposed to be an example to get you to intuit on it, I suppose. So I'm getting that's good for number two. Let's move on to number three here. Number three is going to say something that I've kind of been saying the whole time, though there's a different thing behind it, or a different thing I'd like to get to with it as well. Number three is trust your intuition first, especially as the universe shows you it's honed in and accurate. And they had me include the phrase, you will always be rewarded for this. So let me give an example here. What I mean by trust your intuition first is there have been times, for example, where I have listened to a reading that someone else facilitated and put on YouTube, let's say. And maybe the reading was saying, oh, it's time to take a bunch of action. It's time to take a bunch of action, time to take a bunch of action and take action. And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta take action. Oh my God, what am I doing? What have I been doing? However, when I'll go to take action, my guys would be like, no, rest today. Be like, what? And maybe they'll even say, rest this week. It's not, don't take action this week. Now, I kind of maybe even had a reading I watched that said take action, and maybe even the undertone seemed to me at the time like take action or else. However, my spirit guides and intuition are telling me something different. Which one would be best for me to listen to? My spirit team and my intuition. It, for me, has always worked out better for me to listen to my intuition and channel guidance first over a reading, over something a friend said, over something someone else recommended I do. It has always gone better for me when I listen to my divine guidance and intuition first. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Because, so if you were listening to the reading about taking action, maybe you'd be really tempted to take action that week. And that reading might not have been like wrong per se. It just might not have been the right time to implement that advice. So maybe you take the week off, or you take the week for rest, like your spirit guides tell you. And then maybe the week after that, they're like, okay, now it's time to take action, like that reading said, or now it's time to start working on this thing, or XYZ. And maybe if you hadn't listened to your spirit team and intuition and had listened to the reading first, you would have tried to take action and it would have got stuffed, and you would have stumbled, or it would have been jammed up, or you would have wasted all this energy and then been redirected a week later by your spirit guides to work on something else because you thought you were supposed to be working on something, but it wasn't really the best move for you at that time. And then you'd get to that next week when your spirit guides would be like, okay, time to take action. And you'd be exhausted from trying to push against the flow, I guess you could say, or push against what was actually for your highest good at that time if you had listened and paid attention to your own intuition. And then you'd be like, oh, I should have listened to my spirit guides and intuition. However, that applies to like everything. That applies to information you hear. That applies to directions to go in life. That applies to like who do you date. Sometimes that applies to listening to your intuition over your logical mind. For the most part, though, when I got this one to write it down, I really felt it talked about listening to your own intuition before you listen to the intuition or alleged intuition of others. I personally have been burned in the past listening to other people's intuition or what they were saying before what I was getting intuitively and channeled wise. And I don't recommend it. And then there have been a lot of times where someone would say something, but I'd be getting something different. I would go with what I was getting. It would work out so well. And I'd be really glad that I didn't listen to someone else over myself. So as you hone in your intuition, divine guidance, please listen to it. It kind of doesn't matter what anyone else says. And if you're meant to listen to something someone else says, your spirit team will tell you, at least when you get to a certain point, or when it's best to listen to those other people. Your spirit guides will be like, yes, do that, or yes, implement that, or yes, listen to that person. For me, it's not a great mystery when I'm supposed to listen to something someone else says, because it's not like every single thing everyone else says is crap or anything like that at all. It's just going with your knowing over pretty much anything else as long as it's for the highest good. And the universe will show you how you work, how things work for you, how your intuition works. So once you get it honed in, you'll kind of, or maybe not even just kind of, like you'll know what's going on. Hopefully, not just for the most part, but for all the part or whatever, phrase is supposed to be instead of for the most part. What's the phrase where it's all the parts instead of just the most part? All the part, not, yeah. Anyways, my spirit guides are saying there's nothing else to be said on that right now, and I don't want to waste too much time on something that's pretty much essentially reminding you to listen to your intuition and divine guidance. So let's move on to number 4 here, and this one's going to be a little bit different, perhaps. Actually, it's going to be building off it's going to kind of connect in with the previous ones, actually. It's also going to be a little bit different, I think. So, number four is there's probably a better way than the commonly held belief. And this applies to very many things, okay? And this is going to be another thing where it's going to be probably best for you to listen to your intuition on a case by case basis regarding this. However, there's a lot of conventional wisdom, even in spirituality, a lot of commonly held mainstream beliefs that aren't actually the best ways to go about things. And manifesting could be a really good example because there are a lot of law of attraction gurus, so to speak, trying to run around out there, if you click around. And I don't blame them. I mean, manifesting is cool. I think a lot of people are really interested in it. I'm not trying to knock those people. However, there are a lot of people purporting things that are just blatantly the opposite of what I found to be true or what's worked for me over and over and over again in my life really well. And there are definitely people out there, again, who their energies just aren't there. Like when you see them, you're like, you are not there. You're not connected. You're not coming from intuition. Where did you get this information? You're just pulling it out of your butt. Like there are people that are really rough to like listen to. And if you look at their energy, you'll be like, not listening to you. I'm going to tell a bit of a story or example to kind of highlight this a little bit more so you might kind of understand what I'm talking about here. And it kind of gets into this interesting territory that I know I've talked about before on channeled readings and things like that. And then there's some really interesting questions you can ask and really interesting possibilities with this one if you will consider it for a moment here. So, regarding manifesting, there was a time where for me, I had something that was working for me. I'd really get results with it. And it was kind of working. I guess the way I'll do my best to describe it is it was something along the lines of like I would ask for something and then it would show up. It was like ask and you will receive in a sense. And that's how it was showing up for me. Like I really pay attention to things, by the way. Like when I approach things a certain way, when I try new things, when I watch different things, I really pay attention. Like, oh, like I'm just aware of how things are showing up differently. If I do this thing a little bit differently, like how is the energy different? Like I'm not just zombieing through all this. if I guess I'll use that term. However, there was one point where there was a lot. It was on social media and it just kept showing up in a lot of different like videos and posts. And it was this idea of like, oh, whatever you think about, you manifest, or whatever you think about, you create. And I could say a lot of things about that right now, but I'll stick to the story for now. And I was like, no, that's not really how it works for me. It's not really how it was showing up for me. It's just ask and you will receive. I don't have to totally freak out about what I'm thinking about all the time. And so I'd be like, okay, yeah, no, that's not it. And then like it would show up again on social media. I'd be like, okay, no, that's not how it's been showing up for me. I'm just going to reassert like ask and I will receive. That's how it's been working for me. And then it was just like, it was like post after post after like video after video. And I almost felt myself at the time, and I don't recommend you doing this right now, by the way, but I almost felt myself like succumb to that and just be like, oh, okay. And now whenever I feel that coming on and I usually know it's not for the highest good and I'll just be like, nope, 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 I won't do that anymore. But I felt like the energies kind of shift, like this energy field thing kind of like appeared around my mind is the way it showed up for me. And then all of a sudden it started showing up like things that I think about would happen. Things that I think about would manifest really freaking quickly. And I don't think that's fun. In some ways, it does make me wonder how slowly the rest of the world thinks if they're purporting that. Because if you have a really intelligent, fast moving brain, or you can connect dots really quickly or think about a lot of things really quickly, and you don't always seem to have control over the thoughts that show up, you can go a lot of different places really quickly. And not all of it is always things you'd like to manifest. So it's not fun per se. And in addition to that, a lot of the thoughts that you are picking up on, if not all of the thoughts sometimes, or maybe even many of the times, aren't even yours as you get into this because you're really aware and you're picking up on the thoughts and energies of other people and emotions and stuff. So getting in a place where you're just like manifesting every single thing that shows up, not very fun because sometimes it's not really great things that show up. And then a lot of people get really maybe it even causes some anxiety for them because they keep having these thoughts and then they're afraid of that manifesting. But then they're like, oh, but I just heard that if you're afraid, it attracts more fear and it attracts the negative things. And now I'm afraid of being afraid. It just turns into this huge, weird spiral that doesn't really need to be there because, and here's what I'm getting to, isn't it interesting that that's not how it was showing up for me before I succumbed to whatever that idea was? Isn't it interesting that something else showed up as an energy field and something different started happening as I guess you could say, bought that belief? And if it's possible that by buying certain things, we can create a different reality, what is actually possible for us to create or generate for ourselves that's way better than anyone has ever put out there into the mainstream as a spiritual belief or idea or way things work, quote unquote? Like, what's actually possible for us to create and generate if we are, to borrow from my spirit guys, because they've had a couple channels where they've used this phrase masters of reality. I actually think it was in the Angelic Insight on Prosperity episode. I think that was episode 5, where they were like, oh, you are masters of reality. And this is kind of what they were, at least one of the ways they were one of the things they were talking about with this, which is you can kind of create, at least to some extent, how things show up, like, and work. So my question is, like, how much of that can we create, or is it possible for us to create? And if so, what's the best we can create with that? And what are the things that people have otherwise created that no longer need to exist because we can create something better? Those questions kind of popped in my head to be presented for this podcast episode beforehand, and I really wanted to ask those because I think those are really interesting things to sit with intuitively, see what you get, and see what's possible for you with all that. Because what if all the ways things are showing up isn't the way it has to show up? And I think it's good to use our awareness with this one and hold it loosely enough, because maybe there's a reason things are showing up a certain way, and it actually is what's for the highest good right now. It is of source, and that would be a good thing to be an allowance of right now. However, maybe there are things we actually have more power to change than we realized, and we don't need to be going through those things, you know? So it might be something you need to experiment with, or something you need to sit with your spirit guides with and see what's possible for you regarding it. However, that's kind of one of the things I wanted to get to with number 4 here. There's probably a better way than the commonly held belief, because you might find, and there's a couple of other things we can get to, or probably a lot of other things we can get to, but at least a couple other things we probably will get to with this one, or at least one other thing. Because that's one way that we can talk about that one, is like, what is possible for us to create as our reality, and what's actually true for us that might be different than what everyone is saying out there. Because there is a lot of bull crap that is peddled. And I'm not saying everyone who does all that and peddles that is ill-intended. That's just what I'm getting to say right now. So it's really good to check in and ask, potentially it could be really good to check in and ask, hey, is there something better than this idea that's being presented to me as far as how manifestation works, or as how healing works, or as how reality works? Is there something that's more true that we could create that's better, etc.? Also, by the way, I'm not saying it's a bad idea to watch your thoughts and your words and what's creating. I'd say pay attention, experiment with it, see what's showing up for you, see how things are working for you, and then maybe ask, well, how could this be better? Universe, what would it take to generate something better than this? If you're in the place to start delving into this, some of you may be new and you're like, what the heck is even going on? What is this guy saying? Others of you might be more like, I've experienced exactly what you're talking about, and yep. And others of you might be somewhere in the middle, but you're ready to delve into this. So just kind of trust where you're at. You don't have to force anything here. Next thing I'd like to get to with number 4 here is maybe a slightly more normal way to look at it, where sometimes people have a belief or something they're saying is the way things have to work, but it just wasn't even true in the first place. Another story I'll tell here is regarding Reiki and energy healing. Usually, for certain modalities, at least, there are these things called attunements. And the attunements are great. They do a lot of really awesome stuff that's for the highest good. They really raise the vibration. They create a lot of shifts and changes for the highest good in a recipient. It puts, like, if it's a Reiki attunement, it puts the Reiki energy. A lot of people say it like puts it on speed dial, so it's easier for them to access, and it also helps to kind of flush their energetic system so that they're a cleaner, purer conduit of, if it's Reiki, the Reiki energies for clients and for themselves. So there might be a certain amount of a cleaning out that happens with it as well. Some people call the period after a Reiki attunement a healing crisis. And I know that phrase gets people's goats a lot. And a lot of people show up to class and they're like, a crisis? Crisis? No, no. And to be honest with Reiki, it's usually not that bad. It kind of depends on how much like work you've done on yourself, how much have you cleared already, where are you at as you're venturing into this. However, there was a modality I was channeling through called, at the time it was called Valleyu Me. Now they gave a new name called Valleyu Ka. You might have seen the ValeyuArt.com URL in the description. That features some of the Valleyu Ka symbols that I've channeled through in artwork form. And that was originally taught as a modality called Valleyu Me. And there was a class that had a certain number of symbols, and people would receive attunements to the symbols and the energies of Valleyu Me. It's all from source. It's all for the highest good, of course. And at one point, I was like, okay, there has to be a better way than people going through some crisis with really potent energies, because Valleyu Me was really potent. And I guess a part of me was like, is this going to cause something really like intense for people because these energies are more potent? And so I was like, okay, there has to be a better way. And during the first class I facilitated for this modality, after the attunements, there was like a break that everyone took, like a 15-minute break. And I actually received a symbol that it pretty much what it did is it removed the crisis from healing crisis. So you got all the benefits of the healing crisis without the crisis part. And what I heard as feedback from that class was like, yeah, we didn't really feel like there was a big, like, crazy thing that, bad thing that happened as far as what people might, I know bad gets into like the weird judgment territory of good and bad and all that. However, the feedback was they were just really floaty and they were elevated, and then they kind of came back down, receiving the benefits of the attunements. And there was another time where I'd facilitated a Reiki master attunement for someone, and they were going through some pretty difficult shakeups as part of the, other people call it, besides a healing crisis, like a detox period following the attunement. And so I was like, okay, well, I think I was being guided to send them that symbol. So I emailed them that symbol and they sat with it. And, then the rest of the period, the detox period, if you will, after that, the healing crisis period, had the crisis removed, it was a lot better for them. So all the feedback on it so far has been, yeah, that really helped. So my point with all that, though, is a lot of people might have said, oh no, you just have to live with the healing crisis. That's all there is to it. Sorry. At the same time, there was something else possible that happened for me, with all that, when I was like, there has to be a better way, and I can't remember if I asked for that better way or if I just like was just like a part of me or something just showed up like there has to be a better way, and then they channeled it through me, a spirit guides, angel source. So that's another thing I'll talk about with this idea of, is there a better way than the commonly held belief or the mainstream belief that could be just way better than what's currently there? Another thing I'll just say is maybe a disclaimer is there might be commonly held beliefs or spiritual teachings that are really helpful for you or that are really effective for you. However, I would pay attention to that. Like, how effective are the things you're implementing? Are the things you've been hearing? Are the things you've been trying over time? And just see what works for you and what's effective, and stick with those things that really work well for you and that are for the highest good, and get great results time and time again. You don't have to be stuck between differing opinions forever. You don't have to be stuck between, oh, I heard this and then my spirit guide said this. However, I'm still kind of worried about this thing this other person said. Like, you can really put these things to the test and see what happens. And if you don't have if you have your intuition and channeling honed in, you'll probably already know right away. Like, someone will say something and your guys will be like, nope. Like, there have been a lot of times where I'll just listen to people talking and my spirit guides are giving me the play by play after each thing that's said. They're like, "Yeah, that's not true. Yep, that's true. Yep, that's actually true. Nope, that's not true. Nope, that's not how that works." And so I remember someone who knew me a bit better at one point. It was still kind of a little bit earlier in our relationship, but they were talking and I was kind of just listening. And then they're like, "Wait a second, your guys are correcting me as I'm talking, aren't they?" And I was like, "Yep, they are." Because why not? I'd rather have the truth and that discernment, and it doesn't bother me. And it is a lot better for me to just know what's true in the moment than to get taken for a ride by whatever the heck someone says or thinks or whatever opinion. So ask your guys if there's a better way regarding certain things, or if something is the best possible way for something to go. And I hope all this is helpful so far for you. I hope this is helpful for you as well, as you're kind of hearing different things about spirituality or different ideas or different beliefs about how healing works or healing modalities work or whatever. As a last note, I kind of already said it, but it was written. My guides pretty much had me write it down in a different way here. Is if you have something that's working for you, don't turn it off for the conventional stuff out there. As in, like, don't turn away from something that's working really well for you for a commonly held belief, for just some random thing someone with a lot of followers or not a lot of followers or whatever says. It's probably better you're going with what the universe has shown you is a great way for you to be going right now as far as how you do things or whatever this is regarding. So they're like, "Okay, let's move to number 5." That's what they wanted me to say on that one. I think there were some other ways I could have talked about number 4 here. I'm being told no, though. So we're going to go to number 5 here. So number 5 is energetic boundaries are potentially huge as you get to a healed, very aware, connected, and expansive place, especially the last thing, expansive. And I realize not all of you may be in the place where this is what you need to hear right now. For some of you, it is. For a lot of you, it might be helpful in the future, I'm hearing. However, this thing happened where I've gotten to, and like this is just information I've gotten intuitively, it's things other people have told me as well. So I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here or be like, me so good, as I say these things. But I've gotten to a place that's rather healed, like a pretty dang healed place. Okay. And there was this time, there's like a lot of things I'm trying to say at once here. So give me a second. One thing I noticed was as I got to a really healed place, however, also a very aware, intuitive, highest connected, expansive place, I would pick up on and be aware of a lot of what other people were going through, I guess, like people's thoughts, emotions, energies, and things like that. And I don't want to say it would like throw me off. However, there was a time where it was a rather difficult experience for me. It was a very big challenge for me to deal with that, especially as it was a newer experience for me. And I wasn't at the time maybe 100% sure what was going on. Because it was interesting. As I progressed from there, there would be times where I'd be like, okay, I would just sit there and I would just say the same intention, like I ask to be free from others' energies and emotions right now. I ask to be free from others' energies and stuff right now. I ask to be free from others' energies and stuff right now. And it would feel like this energetic layer just like lifted and was gone. And there was just peace and joy and happiness and calm and things were great. And there was a smile on my face. And then like all this stuff would be like, bleh, after a bit. And so none of it was mine. None of the stuff, none of the anxieties, none of the anxious thoughts, none of the anything was really mine at all. I was actually in a really great place. So as you progress, if something like this happens to you and you get to a very healed, fully healed state or whatever it is for you, and if you keep going with, energy healing, channeling, intuition, and things like that, and you get to this place where you're like, what's going on? I've done all this work. I know I'm healed intuitively. I'm healed. All these people who are intuitive tell me I'm in this really great healed place. Like, why do I have all this stuff coming up? It might not be yours. You might wish to check in with your intuition. Like, is any of it mine? Or is it the world stuff? Or is it other people's stuff? And from there, if you get your energetic boundaries, and maybe you have a different way you'd like to phrase it for your life, and that's okay. As you get that honed in, you're going to have a much better time, and you'll actually get to reap the rewards and enjoy the healedness you've cultivated for yourself and the great energies you've cultivated for yourself through your work at that point. So, if any of that sounds like you, what can you start to look into, put in place every day as a practice to watch over yourself energetically and set healthy, optimal, energetic boundaries for yourself? Is it a grounding practice every day? Is it something where you're clearing your aura and energies every day, like maybe morning and night? Is it something where you're morning and night, you're praying and asking Archangel Michael to divinely protect your energies, or whatever phrasing you feel, feels best for you? I know some people don't like the word protection. I understand. I know that kind of goes back to maybe number 2, was it? Where fear is a lie. So do what works for you. Again, however, like, what are the things you can do every day to start putting the energetic boundaries in place and putting the boundaries in place to help you out so you can enjoy your life? Because you're not supposed to go through everyone else's crap 24/7 and be a dumpster fire of everyone else's stuff, if you will. Traumas, dramas, emotions, negative thoughts, anxieties, and things like that. You don't have to live that way. So from there, it kind of becomes a healthy boundaries game. Like, you deserve to live in a reality, in a world, in a life, or experience a life where you reap the rewards of the work you've done on and for yourself, the authentic work you've done on yourself. So I realize I could talk a lot more on how to set energetic boundaries. I'm getting no. That might be a separate episode. Or I did talk about some ways, by the way, in those examples. That might be a conversation for another time, another episode, a video, something else. At least take the idea for now and see if that's something that would help you to implement. And it couldn't hurt to get good at those things now if you feel like that's something that will help you now or in the future. If you're going to be on this path, or you're a really energy aware kind of person, you're aware of a lot of stuff. Okay, so I do have a number 6. It's kind of almost potentially like a culmination of everything we talked about so far. And my spirit guides actually said it in a way that was a little bit more abrasive that I don't think I can say on the podcast. Though I'll do my best to get it in a language that's clean here. And my spirit guides do swear, and they do it for emphasis. And I don't need to explain that. I guess I don't need to defend them on that, because it's effective. And who judges words? Humans. Humans make up words and then the meanings to them, and then they're like, "But these words are bad. We're going to judge these ones." I'm like, well, that's kind of silly. I mean, they don't have to be bad words. They right? Anyways, and some of these harken back to number 4 and the stories I talked about with number 4 here. It's just find how you work and don't literally F everyone else. It was just a really strong message of like, find how you work. It kind of doesn't matter what anyone else is saying if you have something that's true for you and that works really well for you and it's effective in what you're doing. Because there might be a lot of people who are going to judge certain things as wrong, and then they're right, and then you're wrong if you're doing something different than they think, or their opinion, or different things like that. However, if you have something that's legitimately effective and working for you, isn't that one of the big things you'd really like to have with all of this, and with manifesting, with energy healing, with, if you channeling, with spirituality, if you call it spirituality, with connection to source and intuition and things like that? Are you you're probably not doing it to fit into other people's, judgments of what's right and acceptable, and all those projections. At least for me, I prefer things that authentically work and are effective and make a difference for the highest good for myself and the world. So effectiveness is one of the things I really look at with things I do and am putting into place. And I would guess that's something you might want to consider as well for yourself with the things you spend your time on in your life, the life that you only get one iteration of you as this time. Like, yeah, So I realize I don't have like a whole lot more to add to that right now, in part because I told the stories in number four that I was potentially going to say for this one. So I hope you just kind of get the gist. So they were saying there were like a few channeled messages perhaps they'd like to bring through for this crowd, for the people tuning in. And then we'll probably start to wrap it up here. So let me see what they'd like to say for you guys here before we close it out regarding all this or just regarding anything else they'd like to that would be for that's going to come through for you right now. So, one thing they're adding in is your journey doesn't have to be owned by anyone else. It doesn't have to look the same way as another person's. You don't have to do all the same things. You don't have to think all the same things as them. Your journey is meant to be yours. And in some ways, you could say it's between you and source. And that might be, according to them right now, the optimal way to go about it, or an optimal way to go about it, for this crowd is like, what is source saying? What is the universe showing you? What is your soul saying? Other people can be conduits of source, of spirits, of the universe, of your spirit team for you. However, at the end of the day, they're recommending you listen to the universe, not just those people. So, for example, you can listen to the universe through those people and through the signs and synchronicities, but it doesn't mean give your power away to those people beyond that, or maybe even for that, because the universe might have a bunch of other ways it can get you the message besides those other people, so you don't necessarily have to give your power away to them at all or anyone. Another thing they're kind of talking about that they'd like me to add in here, it might be like a reprise to number four a little bit here. It's kind of what I've been talking about all along, though. It might just be a more explicit example or specific example, is because that was about like the commonly held belief. Like, what about societal beliefs as well? Like, there are a lot of interesting points of view, I guess I'll say, that people have. Like, a lot of people think because that's all that they've been told, it's not even necessarily the truth that life has to be difficult. Or how many times have you heard a phrase like, oh, there's always something? Oh, life is never easy. Oh, making money is hard. Oh, life's a bee, and then all that weird stuff. And like, what if none of that is true, or none of that has to be true for you? Because there are other people who talk about possibilities like, well, what if life can be easy? And that's maybe one thing you could add in is like a what if there's a better way than the commonly held beliefs? Another possibility you can get to that's not just what everyone else is saying. Like, what if it can be possible for you to have ease with money and making money? I feel like I've probably mentioned things like that in prior episodes, or my spirit guides have mentioned things like that in prior episodes as well. So, in some ways, they're kind of mentioning like going on your journey and uncovering possibilities, that are beyond what you are fed by conventional wisdom or the common thing everyone says per se. Like, what is truly possible for you? What are the common things out there you no longer have to live by? One more thing they're recommending I mention to you guys, or telling me to mention to you guys, is like if you do have things where you're caught between two different bits of information, different people have, said perhaps, because sometimes there's just like blatantly conflicting information. There's one story I'll tell you about where, for example, there was one time I heard or read from someone somewhere. It was something along the lines of like, oh, if your light is really shining bright, then these entities will be like yummy and they will jump at you. And then sorry, I didn't mean to trigger any of you if that triggered any of you. The thing I'm about to get to, much better. So bear with me for a second. Because other people would say the exact opposite, where they'd be like, oh, the more you open your chakras and shine your light, the less anything, dark, quote unquote, or anything like that can get to you, or it will even be able to get near you. Thankfully, if, I was getting the latter, the second one is the truth. However, if you get caught between conflicting information like that, where you're just gonna you're tempted to shut down because you're like, well, it seems like I'm screwed no matter what I do at that point. If, 'cause, maybe just check in with someone who is really intuitive, or it might be good to just like, okay, we'll check in on that later on in my journey, and once your intuition and channeling's more honed in, you can look back and be like, oh, was that true or is something else true? And just see what you get regarding that. Because there is a lot of weird stuff out there as far as people's beliefs or ideas, which has kind of been what a lot of this podcast has been talking about. And the more you can get to truth, the better things are going to be for you, probably. At least that's what I was hearing, is the more you get to what's true for you, the better things are going to be. So they're saying we are done. I hope this has been helpful and resonated for you. I realize this wasn't a full channel mode interview like the past couple episodes, so I still hope this was helpful or gave you some ideas that were helpful for you in your journey. And that's it for this episode, and I will see you in the future.